Well, he was about 6 feet tall. Very good-looking guy. Pointed ears, slanted eyebrows, slightly greenish-tinged skin, a severe bowl haircut, short hair, bowl cut across the forehead. And the slightly greenish tinge in the skin was attributed to the fact that the copper was attributed to the copper content in his blood, heavy on the copper side in the blood. So he had this kind of a greenish, somewhat greenish, yellowish greenish look. Typically thoughtful, reserved, took great pride in being a logical creature rather than a creature of emotion. In fact, came from an Earth human mother and a Vulcan father. And the Vulcans were described as a race who at one time had been extremely emotional and quarrelsome, and had almost done themselves in because they were always in a fight with each other or somebody else. And at one time in the past had come to the conclusion that to preserve their race, they had to move to logic and to eliminate emotion, that emotion was dangerous for them and catastrophic, potentially catastrophic. So they ruled out emotion and became a logical race. And Spock is the product of a very logical father and a very logical line of heritage on that side. On his mother's side, human. So he was a character who was in constant internal conflict, the choosing to be logical, but having to deal occasionally with his emotional side, and to repress that and deny it constantly. I thought it was a very human construct. You stop and think about it. Many of us, if not all of us, go through this conflict, particularly as adolescents. That's where it usually manifests itself the most. Before we have become logical thinking people, we are irrational, childish, impetuous, inclined to be angry and get into fights and so forth. Why do adults get into less fights than children do? Because they've gone to the logical side. They've become more thought-oriented than emotional-oriented, more left brain than right brain. And so I think it was easy for humans to identify with them, to understand what that process was. And in the earliest episodes where we were able to demonstrate that, where you saw Spock struggling with that control, the audience said, I get this guy. I know what's going on with him. It worked quite well. He was a very bright person, a scientist, very knowledgeable, very familiar with human history and human nature, extremely loyal, committed, dedicated to serving the fleet, the ship, and the captain. Dependable, obsessive about getting things right. Sometimes a weakness, but usually a strength. Well, there was always the vulnerability for him, showing emotion would be very embarrassing, wrong for Vulcan. A difficult relationship with his father, who always demanded more than Spock seemed to be able to deliver. He was always trying to prove to his father that he was a good Vulcan. Sometimes lacking in the emotional ability to relate to a humanistic situation, and therefore could be faulted for being too logical, too scientific, too precise, too cold and distant. McCoy would accuse him of that often, cold-blooded, blah, blah, that kind of thing.